Hi, everybody. I'm live. This is my first Substack live, and it's Billy's first too. So it's a bit of an experiment to see if we.
Hello.
We did it, Billy. We did it.
It really works.
It really
Oh,
worked.
I gotta get rid of these notifications, but okay, whatever. Mm.
It's really nice to meet you, Billy. I love Now Monk in Pieces, and I'm really glad that you're here to chat about it with me a little bit.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. So Monk in Pieces is about the life and work of Meredith Monk. And, to get us started, you want to talk about how this became your movie?
Sure. My wife, Katie Geisinger, has been singing, performing, moving, all the things you do with Meredith for about over 30 years. She was cast in the original production of Atlas in 1990. And I had never heard of her before then, but she started bringing back music, and she's been working with Meredith all that time, basically every major piece that Meredith's written, Katie's been in. So I've had this like great front row seat at and a chance to really appreciate her music, and also to get to know her a little more, and to kind of, you know, what she was up against, how she kind of just stuck to this one, vision that she had, and her discovery about the human voice. And it just struck me as like, oh, this would be a great film if she'll let me do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what you end up um, really diving into is how like wild, experimental, collaborative searching she was from minute one until today. She's really interested in the unexplored, and she's like just a totally just seemingly unafraid to be completely original, to fall on her, fall
Yeah.
flat, enrage people, to bore people, to confuse people. Um, I think it was really, upsetting to see the kind of hostility and sexism that she faced. Do you want to talk about that little? I mean, it's not surprising. It shouldn't be shocking, but it did feel very gendered, that no one was complaining about, you know, there are criticisms lodged at her that nobody was saying about Philip Glass or etc.
I think that's true. I think, you know, part of in an odd way, part of the problem was that she was good at so many things. Somebody once said it was a good strategy for a woman creator at that point to be more of a moving target, in the sense of like, especially the field of music composition was so male dominated at that point in the 60s and 70s. And that was really the heart and soul of what she did. But she was also good at theater, and she was good at film, and she could make video installations, and so she became like an interdisciplinary artist before that was a thing. And I think a lot of people, especially the sort of more mainstream critics, were just like, well, what are you really? You're not serious if you're doing all these things. But yes, a lot of it really was gender like specific, the targeting, especially the sort of stuffy, New York Times critics in the 60s and 70s, who we feature. When I started reading some of that, because Meredith had sort of tipped me off that they just wrote, she said they wrote reviews that made my hair stand on end. And I did, and the more I dug into those old New York Times reviews, they were very sexist. They were like, oh, she's being, talented in her precocious little girl way. They said stuff like that, or like, they made a big deal that she used nudity in some things. She's a pleasant enough girl as long as she doesn't take her clothes off. Crazy stuff like that. So yeah, that was certainly an element. And we also found this really odd piece of archival footage of like a public access TV guy interviewing her, and that also very kind of weird dynamic, and where but yeah, but Meredith points out, and this is one of the things that happens. You have to like be so selective when you make a film. You can't include everything. But the reality was, she did have supporters even early on, but they were in the sort of downtown, press. They were like Village Voice. They were Soho News, these kind of, and those were people who really caught on
Like,
to her much earlier.
yeah, and she also had institutional friends
Yes.
She
Yeah.
she did that incredible installation in the Guggenheim very early in her career, and it's no
Yeah.
let to get the Guggenheim to let you take over. Um, so it wasn't like you know, uh, she had people who were fervently in her corner, seemingly from moment one. I I I didn't know anything about her mother, who was a commercial she sang commercial jingles, um, on radio, and it felt like her career was very much kind of, a reaction to the constraints that her mother experienced. You wanna talk about that?
Absolutely, and, one thing that, I actually found out during filming about her mother. I hadn't known this before, and it was an instant way to bond with her because my mother actually was also a commercial radio singer,
Oh my
maybe a little bit afterwards, but and both of us bonded over the fact that it was just an impossible situation to sort of live up to the kind of like role of a housewife and mother, and then have this incredibly demanding career, like going into the city. Both of us, I mainly grew up in the suburbs, and then moms would go in and do their thing on the NBC Camel Caravan or whatever it was. But it did have a legacy, both good and bad, I think, for both of us. So that was something we really bonded over. But it came out once. I was just in her kitchen, and she was like, "Oh, you didn't know that about my mom?" And she started playing like an MP3 that she had of her mom on her. This is before I had any cameras in there or anything, and she just got this, like, dreamy look on her face, and it reminded me of the same feeling about listening to my own mom sing because, you know, um, I think it was just a beautiful sound, and, like, there was love in the sound in some way, and, so I think, that was a big discovery, and then I really decided I wanted to shoot a scene where she's just listening to her mom because I just remembered that look, and I wanted to sort of capture that, and, I was really happy with that whole scene, and yeah, the legacy that it left. But to your point, it was also a cautionary tale for her because her mother, you know, anybody in that kind of job, in that profession, was just completely at the mercy of the sort of fickle radio producers, and it was ageist and it was sexist, and you're the hot young, singer for the moment, and then a couple of years later, somebody else comes along and, bye-bye. So Meredith really saw how that affected her mother, and really decided, "I need to make my own path, produce my own work." So that you're right, that was kind of what, had a big impact on her.
Where do you think I w it wasn't clear to me, like, what her lineage is, like, other than reacting to her mother's career and having been brought up by a singer, what were her, like, aesthetic influences?
She talks a lot about her experience as a student at Sarah Lawrence, and in particular Bessie Schoenberg, who was kind of a famous, I think she was a dance teach instructor basically. But, I think she also, like, there was something, it was in the air in the '60s, this kind of amazing confluence of, young artists. They had a cheap loft space that they could
I remember
occupy.
those
And
gigantic, beautiful lofts with gorgeous light and, like, empty, just empty, limitless space to put on shows. But go on.
no, exactly, and there was a kind of atmosphere of, "Hey, you're a filmmaker, I'm a poet, let's, work together, or I'll try making film as a poet, or there was a real crossover between the disciplines, which Meredith really, I think, was very inspiring to her to be part of that, and she worked with a lot of different, artists back then. There was this famous group Fluxus that she did some work with. She did a piece with Yoko Ono. She worked with Bruce Nauman. She was out in San Francisco, and he had like a big studio in a abandoned grocery store in San Francisco, and they did some really wild experimental videos together. So I think it was just, there was a lot of that kind of crossover, that kind of excitement about, collaborating with different people. And then I think she just got to a certain point where she felt she was spread too thin. She sort of described this moment to me. There's so many things that didn't make it into the film because you have to be selective, but she talked about kind of, racing, around in a cab in New York from one gig to another, and then feeling like, "When am I gonna do my work?" And really, like, getting, like, eczema because she was so nervous about it, and wanted to just, but yeah, I think that was the inspiration, but she's so eclectic, as you know, in terms of what she allows to influence her. You can hear the Broadway influence. You can hear the fact that as a kid, she was listening to the latest show tunes that her mom was playing for her and that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
I had no idea how influential she was on Bjork. I thought that was
Yeah.
just really fascinating. Bjork tells a story about which of the albums was it that she listened to? Like, she listened to it, like, every
Dolman music was the one I think that yeah.
and what did she say exactly? That she listened to it every night for years, right?
Yes, she said she had a boyfriend at the time. She was 16. She was already doing, like, playing in punk clubs, and this boyfriend, it was very sweet the way she told this story about how she would do her gigs and come home late at night and climb through his window and into his bed, and that he had this album of Meredith's called, Dolman Music, and it kind of I think up to then, she didn't even think of herself as like a writer for the voice. She was very focused on instruments mainly, I think, and I think that really, like, alt changed her course, and she said, "I, like, listened to it nonstop for years," and then she actually started doing, like, Gotham Lullaby was the big one where she did her own version of a couple of different versions of Gotham Lullaby, one with, the Brodsky String Quartet, and then she did this beautiful one with, Zena Parkins, who is a harp player, and they did that on Bjork's, Vespertine tour, and it's just really gorgeous, yeah. So,
So, were there any did Meredith impose any limits on you? She certainly has strong opinions about how her work should be presented. Were there any conflicts between you as this
well, I knew I wouldn't be able to survive, an arrangement where she could look at my rough cuts. So that was a huge concession that is very rare, and that was a big leap of faith on her part, and she gave me that, and that was,
so what were the so she knew
wonderful.
through your wife, so she had some, you know, she she had a deep sense of you, but did she, like, look at your work? Were there long conversations? Like, what was that process?
She had definitely seen, other films that I've made, including this short film that was the last kind of independent film that I made, a short film about the Hollywood blacklist, where she really appreciated how I used the archival footage in
Mhm.
particular. So I think that really helped the 30-year relationship, knowing that Katie was, still actively involved with her and that Katie would have her eyes on everything. And of course, there were restrictions on what I could what would she be comfortable filming, and how much she didn't really like cameras around rehearsals that much.
Yeah, right, no, yeah.
We were able to do some of that, but I think when we hit on this idea that, "Look, what if we just film you going about your daily rituals and your daily routines?" And so that she was very comfortable with that, and I just happened to get this fantastic Jeff Hutchins, who's a cinematographer I'd worked with before. He had like a still photography background, so it's kinda perfect to, like, do those beautiful compositions, and those are really inspired by I had never known about the films of Chantal Akerman before, and I read some random Guardian list, and so, like, "This is the greatest film of all time, Jeanne Dielman." I don't know if you know her work, you
Yeah, a little
probably
bit.
do. Um, and she does these, like, beautiful locked off shots from a distance. It could be 5 minutes on a woman doing dishes or something, you don't even see the face, but there's this poignancy, the way it's used and the way it's filmed, and I thought, "Okay," I sort of started watching those films with Jeff, and we kinda, like, were inspired to do that, so,
Yeah, I was going to mention, like, so there's, like, the early archival this is done so well, so hats off. There's the early archival video of Meredith doing a kinda home tour, like, "Here's the kitchen, here's the bathtub in the kitchen,
yeah,
here's" whatever, and, and she has this, like, beautiful loft, but it's also clear that, like, this is it's her workspace, it's her living space. And then, throughout the film, she's still in that loft.
yeah,
And I think it's the last shot of the film, and
yes,
this very kinda slow, um, patient lingering on her, and her plants and her piano. And yeah, it's really quite beautiful. And I'm glad you trusted that those moments were going to be so kind of heartfelt.
Yeah, thanks. I owe a lot to the editor I worked with, Sabina Krahenbuhl, who's was just so fantastic because I had sort of hit a wall. I did a lot of editing myself, but I also, worked piecemeal with a couple of other editors, and I got to this point where I think I had a 50 or 55-minute cut, and I was like, "God, can I feel that there's a longer, real feature length film here," and I brought in Sabina, and she's like, "You need to go back and do a whole 'nother day of those kinds of scenes with Meredith, and then we can put them throughout, as this kind of, these sort of meditative, intimate moments between the kind of kinetic energy of her actual work, her visual material, and her music. We did them all without music until the very last one, where I decided that's the place for Do You Be, which is this like incredible sort of cry to heaven that you have to be really ready for. And it felt like the right moment. But yeah, you're right. It did also take on an emotional poignancy where you felt her aloneness, that she had lost, so by then you hear about her relationships and, the death of Mika van Hook, who was her partner for so long, and then the death of the turtle and, all that stuff. And
I'm
you do
sorry
start to feel,
the phone around and introduce you to my turtle, but I
oh,
do.
no, oh, you do.
That was part of the.
Oh,
Oh my god.
yeah.
Yeah, she. What was her turtle's name? Was No, it was Proton.
Neutron. No, Neutron.
Yes.
Right, but then they didn't wanna use Neutron for that film in Turtle Dream, so they found another turtle named Proton.
But no, but sorry to interrupt you. She had had incredible loss. Like she lost, she made sacrifices. She wanted to be a mother. Ping Chong didn't want to have children. That relationship, eventually ended. She fell in love with a woman. One of her collaborators, he died. Turtle dies. It's just Meredith. Of course, it's Meredith and this global reputation, of being a total genius and
Mm.
being, awarded by Barack Obama and having the Dalai Lama pitch you an idea for for, for a song. So she's not totally alone. But yeah, I just love that whole of that arc of the apartment being a constant.
Yeah. I love that too, and it was great to find that footage. Some of the best documentaries were actually, like, German or, European film crews that were again, she was really appreciated in Germany and sometimes much more than here. And, they came in there was a German crew that did that in, like, the early '80s, that Loft tour, and we couldn't even get a copy with where the original English from the scene was not c it was all covered with German, mostly covered with German overdubs. So, because we couldn't get the split tracks, so the editor that was another brilliant Sabina thing, is she somehow managed to make it work and use the little bits of English that were available and did a lot of cutting around the German
No, I
overdub.
that's
Yeah.
really cool. So I noticed I went to the website, and the film is playing all over the country and in parts of Europe. That makes sense to me in terms of the European stuff because the avant-garde art seems to have always had and probably still has more supporters in Europe than even here. Can you tell me about like what's happening in documentary film? How does a movie like this get financed, and what's the business looking like for docs, and what's the plan? What's the strategy for this? How's it going? I want to know. Like, this is the business section of our conversation.
Sure. Well, first of all, we were incredibly lucky that we got a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities to, like, start to really fund most of the production. And we were lucky that we spent every last dollar before the Trump administration came in. Um, but everything I hear and know and hear from friends and it's dire because the kind of federal, the kind of grant money is drying up, and also I think there's been a lull. And I don't know the business as well enough, the whole commercial streaming end of things, but it was already when we were making this film really drying up for this kind of a documentary. Basically, if people are gonna do an arts documentary, they want it to be a celebrity, or as one programmer put it to me, you c "I don't want anybody I have to Google," which is really sad, because how many great
I want
films
to
about
document, but I don't wanna learn anything.
right, like, don't you wanna discover, and especially even sadly, even PBS, that kind of mentality set in, to a large degree. So it's not easy. We were incredibly lucky to get that NEH grant, and and then after that, it was really like a lot of some generous people who really loved Meredith's work, who wanted to support the film and helped us do that. And like you say, in Germany, Europe, they where there's government funding, there's more of an appetite for avant-garde, or anyway, let's say outside the mainstream kind of arts films, and it's going great guns still. We have a we actually sold it to Arte for the European Cultural Channel, which for a broadcast. We had to cut it down to an hour, but that wasn't too terrible for that. And then it's been at all kinds of festivals all over the world, Asia, Europe, Australia, coming up at Melbourne Film Festival. But then the big yeah, and so the coup for us was getting into the Berlin International Film Festival, because that's just unbelievable place to launch a film, and that really led to all these other festival invitations, and finally to getting our distribution deal. Again, we're incredibly lucky. Most by far the majority of independent docs don't ever get um, just a distributor. We got Zeitgeist Films, which is just they're fantastic. They're just the right company to do this. Zeitgeist, Kino Lorber. So we just opened at, as you know, at IFC Center in New York. We're being held over for a third week.
Yeah.
Amazing. I think we're down to one screening a day, but it's great that they held us that long. And then it's been at the Laemmle Theater, it's playing now, in LA. They just held us for another week, I think, and then in 2 days we're opening in four more cities. So Zeitgeist is doing this nationwide, you know, rollout, so I'm like, this is beyond my wildest dreams for a film that I know is not. It's just not a. She's not mainstream, and the film isn't mainstream, because I really took the form, as the approach as something, the kind of thing that Meredith might do. So yeah,
Well, if people wanna figure out if the movie's coming their way, and it really is all over the country and in some very unpredictable places too, so they can go to monkinpieces.com, to see the full listing of where the movie is
yeah.
presenting. Um,
And
and, Billy Shebar, thank you for this
thank you, Lizzie. It was a pleasure.
Alright, good luck.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.